Hello. In this class, we are going to continue talking about tasks, and we will focus, this time, on different categorizations of tasks that will help us plan adequate sequences for language teaching. We know from previous lessons that in order to plan a sequence of tasks, we first consider the topic or text that is going to guide our work. Then we decide on the main tasks, that is the target tasks, the main tasks that we want our students to be able to do and to be able to solve by the end of the task sequence. Then we think of the preparation or priming tasks that will come before these main tasks, so as for students to successfully achieve the outcome that we want them to achieve by the end of the main tasks. And finally, we decide on what language focus we are going to provide them with for each task. We assess how much language they will be learning, and in terms of our assessment, we will decide whether to go on with the sequence or make changes and introduce adaptations to it. It is important to note at this stage that this is the way in which teacher thinking will progress when planning tasks. This doesn't mean that the sequence will look exactly like this. In fact, this is what we teachers do, and this is the order that we teachers follow in order to develop adequate teaching sequences. In fact, the way in which a teaching sequence will look in a plan resembles more what you see on this slide. Unlike the previous one, in this particular case, we see an order in the sequence that results from the thinking process that we have analyzed previously. In a plan sequence, there will be preparation or priming tasks, target tasks, and then a focus on form, which, depending on the age of the students, may appear as a task that students have to carry out themselves, or some kind of reflection that is done with the help of the teacher. In all cases, there is here a reflection on how language is used. In this class, we are going to see 4 different categorizations of tasks. So let us start working with the first one, which was provided by Willis in 1996. Willis's categorization departs from a pedagogic perspective. Through this categorization, Willis tried to provide a list of the main tasks that are found in most teaching materials all over the world. So she described listing tasks as the ones involving the generation of a list of items, which is very common when teaching vocabulary, for example, or when recycling vocabulary. Ordering and sorting, these tasks involve the classification, ranking, or sequencing of items. Comparing, that is, finding similarities or differences in pictures, texts, and so on. Problem-solving tasks that demand some kind of intellectual activity, such as solving puzzles or using logic to find the answer. Then sharing personal experiences, that is, those tasks that involve students telling something personal. And then creative tasks, which are the tasks that involve using students' creativity to solve some kind of a problem. It is important to bear in mind that in all cases, students are expected to use language. So, when we talk about creative tasks, those creative tasks involve using language in creative ways. The following 2 tasks are examples of the ways in which sharing personal information and being creative are used at the service of language teaching. Notice that in the first task, students have to exchange important information on the most important day for them. In the task that follows, they have to creatively use their imagination so as to design an invitation for a birthday party, and they also have to make a list of the people who will be invited and a shopping list of the items that they will need for the party. In both cases, they are using language to share personal information in the first case and to creatively use language to do something for themselves in the second case. In these other tasks, we can identify listing, ordering and sorting, comparing and problem-solving tasks. Note that the first tasks involve listing words and identifying terms, whereas the pictures involve comparing and contrasting similarities and differences in order to identify the pictures that correspond to a jungle. The tasks on the right consist of solving a problem, that is, using intellectual activity, use logic to determine whether the animals live on the ground or in the trees, and then to decide why is it that jungles are dark. In all cases, children will have to use their cognition in order to identify the answers to these tasks, and they will have to use language to convey their answers. The second classification that we are going to analyze in this class is that coming from Prabhu's work, dating back to 1987. This categorization was one of the first to be developed and has been considered in most teaching materials so as to develop task sequences. This classification is based on the cognitive perspective, that is, it considers the cognitive operations that different tasks require on the part of learners. In his classification, Prabhu distinguishes three main types of cognitive reasoning that are involved in the operations required by these tasks. The first one is information gap. That is, these tasks involve a transfer of given information from one person to another, or from one form to another, or from one place to another, generally calling for the encoding and decoding of information from or into language. These are the tasks that involve sharing information with a partner or reading to complete a chart, or those tasks, any task that involves transferring information. Secondly, reasoning gap tasks involve deriving some new information from given information through processes of inference, deduction, practical reasoning, or perception of relationships of patterns. The clearest example of tasks belonging to reasoning gap are solving puzzles. The difference with information gap is that in reasoning gap, students have to derive information using their logic, whereas in information gap tasks, they simply have to transfer given information from one person to another, or from one form to another. Finally, opinion gap tasks involve identifying and articulating a personal preference, feeling, or attitude in response to a given situation. In these tasks, students involve their creativity or some kind of personal approach to solving the task. This is the case, for example, of tasks in which students have to give their opinion, or they have to invent the end of the story, or any other task that would involve introducing a personal element to solving the task. It is important to note that the outcome of these tasks will be convergent in some cases and divergent in some others. What we need to say is that, for example, in information gap tasks, all students are likely to reach the same answers, whereas in an opinion gap task, everyone will reach a different outcome. That is, everyone will provide a different response. In contrast, problem-solving tasks might be both convergent or divergent, depending on the type of task. This difference is important for planning stages, since they will require different ways of handling classroom interaction and classroom dynamics. Let us now analyze some examples of the tasks that we have just referred to. The task on the left in this handout shows an example of a problem-solving task. Students have to solve the puzzle using a mirror. They have to read the words using a mirror to identify what it is said in the little papers, which are intended as secret notes for Ivan Idea, the spy. In the activities on the right, it is possible to see in the first one a listening comprehension task, which is an information gap task. Students have to listen and try to identify the place where the spy is going. In the second task, students have to read and complete using the appropriate adjective so as to describe the characters in the pictures. Both of them are information gap tasks. In this case, the tasks on the left require students to listen first to identify the correct option, that is, it's an information gap task, and then they will have, with that information, to look at a picture and decide the means of transport that is used by the spy. In the activities on the right, the first one is an information gap task, that is, the spy will talk and students have to complete the passport page using the information from the tape. The task that follows requires students to fill in their personal information. In some cases, they will have to invent information such as passport number. This last task is an example of an opinion gap task.